She said it with a champagne glass in her hand, not across a kitchen table, not in a lawyer's office. She said it in front of 47 people, clients, partners, junior associates, at the anniversary dinner we had planned together, in the private room of a restaurant in Dallas that I had chosen because she once told me she loved the lighting there. Going forward, my wife said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that only comes from rehearsal, Holloway Carr Development will be moving in a new direction, and part of that means I'll be leading this company as sole managing partner. She paused, just long enough. Raymond and I are separating, personally and professionally. Someone near the back of the room set down their fork. She looked at me from across the table, and for just a moment her eyes searched my face for something. Pain, maybe, or protest. What she found instead made her blink once. I raised my glass toward her and smiled. 38 years. That's how long I had been the foundation underneath the building she presented to the world. I was 63 years old, and I had spent the better part of 4 decades being the man nobody photographed at ribbon cuttings. My name was Raymond Carr. I was not the face of Holloway Carr Development. I was the reason it had a face worth showing. My wife had been born Sandra Holloway, Dallas money, Dallas name, Dallas expectation. Her father had built a small commercial property portfolio in the 70s, and by the time I met her at a finance conference in 1987, she was already being quietly positioned to inherit it. She was 32 and brilliant in rooms. She remembered every name, every spouse's name, every detail that made people feel like the only person in a conversation. I was 35, and I understood numbers the way some people understand music, intuitively, structurally, without needing to explain it. We argued at a breakout session on municipal bond financing. She challenged my methodology. I challenged her assumptions about risk. That night, over dinner, she told me she didn't often meet men who pushed back. I told her I didn't often meet women who made me want to. That was the beginning. For the first decade, it was genuine partnership. She worked the relationships. I structured the deals. Her father's 3 commercial properties became 11, then 20, then a development pipeline that stretched across 4 Texas counties. When her father stepped back in 2001, we formalized the company together, Holloway Carr. Her name first because it carried weight with the legacy clients. Mine second because I had earned it. The formula held for years. She would walk into a room and make every potential investor feel certain. I would go home and make sure the numbers actually supported what she'd promised. She was the confidence. I was the architecture. But somewhere in the last decade, the architecture became invisible. When clients praised the Meridian Commons deal, the mixed-use development in Fort Worth that I had spent 14 months structuring through 3 rounds of municipal financing, they praised Sandra's vision. When her father's old friends referred new business, they called it Sandra's company. When industry publications ran profiles, I was mentioned in one paragraph, usually near the end, usually with the phrase, supported by. I noticed. I didn't complain. I prepared. 6 years ago, when I first heard quiet conversations about succession, our senior partners wondering aloud what the company looked like in the next chapter, I opened a document on a Saturday morning while my wife was at a charity luncheon. I titled it simply, Carr Capital Holdings, LLC. On paper, it was a land acquisition vehicle. I told Sandra and our partners it was a tax efficiency structure, a way to hold option agreements and land titles in a separate entity to reduce liability exposure. Our attorney reviewed it. Our accountant signed off. The partners approved it without much discussion. Why wouldn't they? The structure saved the money in year 1. Over the following 6 years, as new development projects came together, the option agreements and ground leases on our most significant properties were held through Carr Capital. Not concealed, not disguised. Filed correctly, disclosed in the appropriate schedules, documented in board minutes that anyone could have read. The distinction between Holloway Carr Development as the developer and Carr Capital Holdings as the land control entity was there in black and white. My wife had never attended those quarterly reviews. She called them Raymond's accounting sessions. She had better rooms to be in, By the night she raised that champagne glass, Carr Capital Holdings held controlling interest in option agreements on 11 active development sites representing approximately $340 million in projected development value. Holloway Carr Development was the developer of record, but it developed on land I controlled. I watched her finish her announcement. I watched the room recalibrate. A few of our senior partners exchanged glances. Two of our largest institutional clients, men I had personally shepherded through 3 separate deals, looked at me with expressions I recognized immediately. They were doing the math. When the dinner ended, I shook hands, thanked the waitstaff by name, and drove home alone. My phone buzzed before I reached the highway. A text from our oldest partner, a man I had known for 22 years. "Call me when you can, tonight if possible." I pulled into a gas station and called him back. "Ray," he said, skipping everything, "what just happened?" "Sandra's making changes," I said evenly. "She can't just restructure the partnership in front of clients like that. Half the room is going to think the company is unstable." "They might." A pause. "Are you all right?" I thought about the question honestly. My wife had just ended our marriage in front of the people we had built our professional lives alongside. She had done it publicly, deliberately, the way you make a statement to a room when you want the room to understand who holds authority. I should have felt gutted. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clear. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll talk to you tomorrow." When I got home, the house was quiet. I went to my home office and unlocked the filing cabinet in the lower left drawer. Inside, a navy portfolio thick with tabbed sections. I had updated it 3 months ago just as a precaution. Option agreement summaries, assignment clauses, land control schedules, entity structure diagrams. Everything documented, everything clean. I closed the drawer, sat back in my chair, and looked out at the backyard. 38 years of early mornings and late conference calls and deals that almost fell apart, and deals that saved the year. I had given this company everything but my name at the top. She thought divorcing me was the conclusion. It was actually the beginning. My phone rang at 7:15 the next morning. I was already at my desk with coffee when the call came in from Arthur Benn, the head of capital deployment at Beridian Trust, our anchor investor on 3 current projects. "Raymond," he said, no greeting. "I had my team pull the land control documents on the Fort Worth side last night." I set down my coffee. "The option agreement is held by Carr Capital Holdings," he said, "not Holloway Carr Development." "That's correct," I said. "It's been structured that way since 2019. Sandra's email this morning says she's the sole decision-maker on all active projects going forward." He paused. "But the land isn't hers to decide about, is it?" "The land is under option through Carr Capital," I said carefully. "Holloway Carr has the development rights as defined in our partnership agreement. Any changes to the project structure would require my consent as controlling member of Carr Capital." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "So she can't sell, transfer, or restructure these projects without you?" "That's what the documents say." Another pause, longer. "Where are you going with this, Raymond?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But your investment isn't at risk." By 9 o'clock, 2 more calls had come in from investors I had personally cultivated over the last 15 years. Both had read their documents overnight. Both were asking versions of the same question Arthur had asked. At 9:47, Sandra called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Good morning. What have you done?" Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath it, the way you can hear a hairline fracture before the glass breaks. "I haven't done anything," I said. "I structured a holding entity 6 years ago with full board approval. You were at that meeting." "I was not at that meeting." "You were invited," I said gently. "You said it was an accounting session." Silence. "Arthur Benn called me," she said, "and David Marsh, and Linda Cho." "I know. You told them the land doesn't belong to the company. I told them the truth about how the documents are structured. Raymond." Her voice dropped. "This is sabotage. This is documentation," I said. "Everything is in the board minutes. Everything was in the board minutes. Everything was reviewed by legal. Nothing was hidden." You did this because you knew I was going to. I did this 6 years ago, I said, because I understood that circumstances change. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I spent 30 years building things and watching other people's names go on the plaques. She didn't answer immediately. You have a board meeting at 11, she said finally. They're requesting your presence. I'll have my attorney present, I replied. The line went dead. I sat for a moment looking at the phone in my hand. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Carol Delaney, who had been practicing real estate and business law in Dallas for 30 years and had once told me that the most important document in any partnership was the one nobody read carefully. She answered on the first ring. I already heard, she said. That dinner sounds like it was something. It was memorable. They've called an emergency meeting. I'll be there. Bring the Carr Capital portfolio summaries. Already pulled. When I arrived at the building at 10:50, I walked through the lobby for what felt like the last time as a partner. The receptionist, a young woman named Bree who had worked there for 3 years, looked up and then looked down quickly. Word traveled fast in small companies. The conference room was quiet when Carol and I entered. Our 3 senior partners were already seated. Sandra was at the head of the table. Same posture she always carried into rooms, same composure that looked effortless. Only the set of her jaw told me anything. She didn't look at me. The meeting ran for 90 minutes. Carol presented the Carr Capital structure calmly and methodically: entity formation, board approval, land control schedules, assignment clauses. She read key language aloud without theatrics. The room listened. At one point, one of our senior partners, a man who had been with the company for 17 years, interrupted quietly. We approve this, he said. I remember the board vote. Sandra's fingers tightened slightly on her pen. The question, Carol said, addressing the table, isn't whether the structure is legitimate. It is. The question is what the company's next steps look like given the current entity relationships. One of the partners looked at Sandra. Did you review the land control documents before making your announcement last night? Sandra held her posture. I relied on existing executive summaries. The same partner looked at me. I didn't say anything. By the time the meeting ended, no one had raised their voice. No one had made threats. The room had simply done the math and arrived at the same place Arthur Ben had arrived at 7:15 that morning. You could not restructure or advance 11 active development projects without the cooperation of the man who held the land. Carol and I walked to the elevator without speaking. When the doors closed, she looked at me with something close to respect. Clean, she said. That was the point. She nodded once. What do you want to happen next? I want to make sure the projects are protected, I said. The investors, the contractors are protected, I said. The investors, the contractors, the people who signed on in good faith. None of this is their problem. And, Sandra? I looked at the lobby floor rising toward us as we descended. She made her choice. Now we figure out what comes after it. I went home and sat at my dining room table with a legal pad and a pot of coffee and thought for 3 hours. Not emotionally, structurally. Carol had confirmed that morning that the Carr Capital structure was airtight. But airtight wasn't the same as useful. I had leverage. Leverage without direction was just pressure. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. Arthur Ben again. My board met this morning, he said. They want assurance that the Fort Worth project will proceed on schedule. It will, I said, with you directing the land side. Yes. Then we're committed, he said. Whatever the internal situation is at Holloway Carr, our agreement is with the structure you built. We signed with you. After we hung up, I sat quietly with that sentence. We signed with you. Not with a company name, not with a building or a brand, with a person who had shown up, done the work, and built something reliable over 15 years. That was the only thing I had ever actually wanted. To be valued for what I brought, not tolerated for who I was married to. By 4 o'clock, David Marsh and Linda Cho had both called with similar conversations. Both were staying the course. Both were clear about why. At 4:45, Sandra called again. I answered. The partners want a resolution, she said. Her voice was quieter now. They're talking about bringing in an outside mediator. That's their right. Raymond. A pause. I didn't do this to destroy the company. I know, I said, and I did. Sandra wasn't malicious. She was afraid. She had spent her entire career wondering whether people valued her for her name or her ability, and the older we got, the more the answers seemed to depend on the room she was standing in. I understood that fear better than she probably realized. I had lived a version of it for 30 years. You could have told me about the land structure, she said, at any point in 6 years. I presented it at the board meeting, I said. You were invited. Silence. You knew, she said softly, that someday I might do something like this. I knew that power shifts, I replied. I knew I didn't want to be standing in a room someday with nothing. That's not about you specifically. It's about self-preservation. I humiliated you in front of everyone we know. The directness of it surprised me. I had expected more deflection. You did, I said. I thought, she stopped, started again. I thought if I made the cut clean and public, no one would question whether I earned the position. I thought it would make the authority real. Did it? Another long pause. No, she said. We sat in that silence for a moment, the kind that only exists between people who have shared 38 years of mornings and have now run out of things to pretend. What happens now? She asked. That depends on what you want, I said. The partners need stability. The investors need assurance. The projects need to move forward. I'm willing to work through a formal transition structure that keeps everything functioning. And you? I'm going to build something of my own, I said. It's time. She didn't respond to that immediately. I'll recommend to the partners that they formalize a structured relationship with Carr Capital, she said finally. Long-term, defined terms. That would be practical, I said. Is that what you want? I want what the business requires, I said. What I want personally as separate. The divorce proceedings began the following week. Our attorneys handled it professionally. There was no spectacle, no public dispute. After 38 years, we had learned at least how to be civil in the presence of paperwork. The partners voted 3 weeks later to formalize a 5-year land control agreement between Holloway Carr Development and Carr Capital Holdings, guaranteed minimum fees, project continuation clauses. My role defined not as an employee, not as a partner, but as an independent strategic contractor. It was, in the end, a cleaner arrangement than anything we'd had before. Cleaner because it was honest. I hired a project coordinator named Miles, who had worked in commercial real estate finance for 12 years and had the kind of attention to detail that made investors feel safe. I moved Carr Capital into a small office in Uptown. 2 rooms, a conference table that seated 6, a window that looked out over a parking garage, which I found oddly peaceful. My wife's announcement had been meant to establish that she didn't need me. What it actually established was that the company didn't function without the structure I had built inside it. Those are different statements, and the difference mattered. 3 months after the dinner, Arthur Ben referred a new investor group to me directly. They were looking at a mixed-use development opportunity in Austin. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, they wanted to proceed. Not with Holloway Carr. With Carr Capital. I called Carol that evening. They want to do a deal independent of Holloway Carr entirely, I said. Are you ready for that? She asked. I looked around my small office. The walls were bare. There were no plaques, no framed magazine covers, no photographs from ribbon cuttings. There was a whiteboard covered in numbers and a coffee maker that I had brought from home. Yes, I said. The first fully independent Carr Capital project broke ground 8 months after that dinner. A commercial development in Austin, $62 million, anchored by 2 institutional investors I had cultivated personally over the course of a decade. My name was on the signage at the site, just my name. I drove out to look at it on a Tuesday morning in October. The air was crisp, the sky that particular shade of blue that Texas occasionally produces, as if to remind you what beauty looks like without effort. Workers moved across the site with purpose. Equipment hummed. Everything was proceeding exactly as designed. I stood there for a long time. 63 years old, 40 years of building things inside other people's structures, learning the systems, understanding the machinery that held everything upright while the faces in the photographs got older and the names on the buildings stayed the same. I had been patient in the way that people are patient when they have no other option. And then, when I finally did have options, I discovered that patience had been building something all along. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter, who lived in Denver and had called me 4 times in the week after the dinner to ask if I was all right. I had told her each time that I was. She hadn't fully believed me until recently. The groundbreaking photo is on the company website. Dad, your name is first. I stared at the text for a long moment. Then I typed back, "It's just a sign." She replied with the single word, "No, it isn't." She was right. It wasn't just a sign. It was the first time in 40 years that something I had built carried my name at the top without needing anyone else's permission. Sandra and I spoke by phone occasionally in the months that followed. Practical conversations, project timelines, shared client introductions, the administrative details of unwinding a 38-year marriage. She was professional. So was I. There was grief underneath the practicality. The way there always is when something that lasted that long finally arrives at its honest ending. But there was no bitterness. What we had built together had been real. What had gone wrong had been real, too. I no longer felt the need to assign it all to one account or the other. One afternoon, about 4 months after the groundbreaking, she called me for a reason that wasn't business. I could tell by the first second of silence. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not the kind wrapped in logistics." I waited. "I spent years believing that your competence made my position less legitimate," she said. "I thought people respected me because of you. And I thought if I removed you, they would respect me for myself." She paused. "I was wrong about all of it. You're very good at what you do," I said. "And I meant it. You always were. Not better than I thought I was. Just good at a different thing than you." "That's true. I shouldn't have done it the way I did," she said. "The dinner, the announcement, She stopped. I was trying to prove something to a room full of people who mostly just wanted to know if the projects were going to close on time. I laughed softly. I couldn't help it. After a pause, she laughed too. Briefly, quietly. The laugh of someone who has earned the right to find something terrible a little bit funny. "Take care of yourself, Raymond," she said. "You too." When we hung up, I sat for a while in my office. Outside the window, the parking garage was the same as always. Inside, Miles was on a call with a contractor. The coffee maker was running. Nothing about the room was impressive. Everything about it was mine. 63 years old, 1 year out from the dinner where my wife announced she didn't need me anymore. Carr Capital Holdings had 6 active projects, 21 employees. 3 institutional investment relationships that I had built myself, from nothing, on the foundation of 30 years of work that had finally been given its own address. I thought about what I would say to a younger version of myself, the one who had sat in a hotel conference room in 1987 and argued with a sharp-eyed woman about municipal bond methodology. I would tell him to be patient, to document everything, to build quietly, carefully, with the knowledge that what you construct with integrity eventually stands on its own, even when someone tries to remove your name from it. I would tell him that being overlooked is not the same as being unimportant, that power doesn't require applause, that the most significant things I ever built were built in rooms nobody was watching. The signage at the Austin site had my name on it, but that wasn't the point. The point was what I carried into that room in 1987, and every room after it, the ability to look at a complicated structure, find what was missing, and build the piece that made everything else hold together. The mole maybe if she had earned it. What it actually proved was that I'd built something worth taking, and what I built after was worth everything. If this story reached something in you, If you have ever given your best years to something or someone and wondered whether any of it would survive with your name attached, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you built when no one was watching, because sometimes the most important work we do is the work that doesn't get photographed. And sometimes the morning that changes everything is the one that starts in a quiet office with a cup of coffee, and the clear-eyed understanding that you were never as disposable as someone needed to believe. Subscribe and stay with us. These are the stories that don't get told loudly. That's exactly why they need to be told.